is Emma Bush. Her thesis title is Forecasting the Next Version of American Capitalism, a Tale of Disillusionment and an Attempt at Self-Discovery. And Emma has actually been working with me, and I'm wonderful. So I'm going to turn it over to Emma.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Emma. I'm a double major in writing and rhetoric and global studies. And for my presentation, I will be reading an excerpt from the academic portion of my thesis. Taken in an orthodox economic liberal perspective, I discuss the historical phases of capitalism, justify capitalism's capitalism's existence, and posit a new phase of capitalism defined largely by the digital world's effect on both consumption and production. In the excerpt I'm reading from, I explain how the strength of capitalism lies largely in its longevity. I'm explaining how capitalism is not threatened by its inability to benefit everyone at all times, nor is it responsible for winners and losers within the system. I will begin then. Capitalism has proven that against a variety of external conditions that could necessitate a potential collapse, it is by and large a system capable of persevering. Actually, you know what? My writing brain can't just sit here and let myself make this argument, especially not one that I ethically and personally and fundamentally disagree with. I am not an orthodox economic liberal thinker. I'm so morally opposed to the ideology of orthodox economic liberals or liberalism that the idea of standing up here and making an argument from even my own academic text about it is almost laughable to me. For my thesis, I interrupt my own academic argument to reveal some semblance of the messy truth of how I actually feel about all this. And so I guess it makes sense that I do this for my symposium as well. So, a small interruption. I had said perseverance, that capitalism is a system capable of persevering, but persevering is way too nice a word for what capitalism does. Way too positive a connotation there. Capitalism does not persevere as much as it grows and spreads and infects and sinks its claws wherever it sees fit. But perseverance is a smart word, doing a smart job. It's teeing up a metaphorical hole-in-one that this system is strong. It's infallible. It's not worth trying to oppose or deconstruct. It's too big for little old me or little old any of us to poke holes in or to challenge. This isn't true. Capitalism is a system, a human-made thing built by old rich white men to benefit old rich white men. Marxists say that it's a necessary stage of our economic timeline, but that it will destroy itself from within. And a lot of the times, I'm pretty inclined to believe them. I mean, look at this divide of national income percentages in the US alone. Does that look sustainable? Does that look like something that's persevering, or something that a lot of people with a lot of sway have a lot of interest in upholding for their own benefit? Systems don't persevere alone. They're held up by people more than by invisible forces of abstract might, and that's an important thing to remember. So no, I wouldn't say persevering. I wrote it and I didn't mean it, but if I've learned anything, it's that you can look at the same thing from a million different perspectives and interpret it a million different ways, and that the words we hear and use to describe these things matter. Some say persevere, some say wrap in a sort of like economic stranglehold, tomato. But back to the paper. To cite Alex Kalanikos in his International Politics Journal article, Epic and Conjuncture in Marxist Political Economy, the core interest of capital is the preservation of capitalism, and it is this interest in preservation that enables capitalism to adapt, adjust, and continue operating in times of economic crisis. That's it, really. The system is interested in self-preservation, and for capitalism, that is done by generating wealth. When you set up a system that is driven by an increased turn of profit, of course you are creating room for exploitation. You are more than creating room for it, you are expecting it, you are accepting it, you are rewarding it. This is just simple economics. Sorry to pick on you, but if Zoe hires me to build a chair, and has to pay for the wood, and has to pay for the tools, and has to pay me, and Zoe wants to get some bang for her buck, she has options, and a pretty obvious one at that. Pay me less. That's just math. drive down production costs, boost sales price. When you look at something like economics from a math angle and forget that these numbers you're crunching have, thank you Dr. Kraken, have implications, you can make some real profit-turning decisions. Not paying fair wages, not offering safe working conditions or job protections, exporting your production to countries with less protections in place, and turning a blind eye when companies like Hershey's, of all things, get called out for rampant labor abuse. What I'm trying to say is that research and my education has left me with one conclusion, that exploitation is not some side effect of capitalism that we can just weed off. It's an inherent aspect of it, a grounding element of it. It's a key piece of the fuel that lets the engine run. It's that math problem we did earlier with poor Zoe. It's the logical conclusion that paying someone less could mean making something more, and the incentive to chase that decision like there's no strings attached. Oh no, my presentation, it's Bezos. He hacked me. Anyway, that's not even talking about the environment. Capitalism's destruction of the natural world, business interests not just slowing but actively fighting policy change related to climate and carbon emission and oil production. Don't even get me started on how this organizes global hierarchy. Don't get me talking about the IMF for you global studies majors. You know that conversation will go on forever. Capitalism has created a global system of inequality that it needs to survive. Not as some ugly side effect, not as some unintended consequence, but as an inherent part of why capitalism works, as something it needs to survive. But how does knowing that change my behavior? Will it? Can it? Does it? Right now, today? Is feeling guilty and not in control just part of it? This is not to say that there are not lasting ramifications for many actors as a result. However, what it does demonstrate is that the system will persevere, there's that word again, without human intervention or meddling, especially in juncture points of structural crises, as we are experiencing with the levels of economic depression resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. There will be fallout for some, if not all, of the players involved. We know this fallout, especially from COVID-19, intimately, or from our families, or communities, or news sources, or observation. That's not some statistical, theoretical fallout. It's not some far away, let's talk about it like it's hypothetical fallout. It's easy to slip into framing it that way, and it's framed that way at us a lot of the times, but it's not the reality. It's people, it's families, it's disproportionately low-income families and people of color. It's mega corporations surviving while the mom and pops don't. The resulting suffering is not some intangible thing, and it's a cheap rhetorical pull to even try to frame it that way. To pinpoint this fallout as a weakness of capitalism is to miss the very function of the system itself. This fallout is an organic aspect of the system, one that strengthens competition and exposes where we put value and what businesses and products can survive the bottleneck of the playing field. Now this part really bothers me. Logically it's true, sure, at face value it is, but I don't understand the elevation of a system over a person. To say that debilitating economic conditions are justifiable in the name of strengthening competition is absurd. How we talk about these things can be dangerous. They can and do desensitize us. It isn't a radical thing to believe that if a system is harmful, not just to majority groups either, then that system should be changed. We get convinced a lot that this is a big ask. In my humble opinion, it's really not. But as a mega aside, or seriously mega aside, you ready y'all? Does this not also speak to the idea of human capital, to self-marketability or hireability or employable skills? Without even realizing it a lot of the times, we can begin to apply these same principles to ourselves. That capitalism infection that I was talking about earlier, it exists outside us and around us in all the ways that we've already talked about so far, but it exists inside us too. It changes how we view ourselves, how we view those around us, and how we view a lot of things once you break it down. It's why I have such an illogical dislike for LinkedIn. Truly, illogical is the best word for it. It is an inherently neutral website that has an understandably positive goal. Connect people to people, help people find jobs, help people move on and up and forward. But sometimes thinking about it literally makes my skin crawl. It makes me pointlessly uncomfortable. It makes me marketable. Or rather, it asks me to make myself marketable. And I'm so inconveniently at odds with that idea that the people around me, some of y'all and my parents, are probably tired of hearing about it. But that's just it. I'm frustrated with the prospect of making all of my decisions in an attempt to look employable. I'm frustrated with the phrase, doing it for my resume. I'm frustrated with the idea of having to build my own personal brand. I'm frustrated with talking to peers and younger, high schoolers even, who are already so consumed with picking the best search engine optimal terms to describe themselves, consumed with the right hobbies to pursue to impress schools and employers, consumed with molding their values and extracurriculars and recreation and relationships and entire lives around, will this get me hired? Will this get me noticed? Will this give me the edge? Why do we have to view ourselves like products? How did the infection spread to our brains already? I'm not going to sit here and condemn this mindset because it's practical, it's logical, it's smart, it's literally just paying bills, but it's something that does not come natural to me. And from deep dives into how my generation engages with content about capitalism, I know I'm not alone. I've spent years trying to make it come natural to me because, spoiler, I'm not only going to have to do it someday, but that was years ago now and I'm already in the process of doing it. But all my attempts to just turn off my brain and be chill about this have largely been fruitless. The amount I grapple with these things is kind of alarming. At the very least, it's not something I think a future employer would really like to know, but there it is. Back to capitalism now. This does not mean that the system is flawed. Bullshit. It simply shows capitalism's natural reaction to market forces and external factors that have and always will shift spending and producing. To quote Kalanikas again, capitalism is not just an economic system. It is a form of society with an economic aspect, but also important political, cultural, and ideological institutions that are necessary for its reproduction. This is what scares me most. I am part of capitalism's reproduction. Of course I am. I shop from Amazon and am too cheap and stressed to really be sustainable, and I'm in debt to my government because of my choice to be part of this business, which gave me the opportunity to be here and be at this event and hopefully get a diploma, fingers crossed. I have my closest friends literally right in front of me, and they have to hear this rant every time it gets too loud in my head for me to handle alone. My parents have to listen to it and settle for nervous laughing when I joke about being a commie. I went to visit my sister in Ohio last semester, and she got me wine drunk enough to have to listen to my 2-hour tangent on all the different ways I can be mad about the same root issue. Fresh off the heels of a study abroad to South Korea this summer, where I finally learned about US imperialism from another country's perspective, and it was daunting. It still is daunting. I think it always will be daunting. The way we are taught to think about capitalism and consumption and exploitation and these things in America that we somehow consider privileges instead of rights, like fair wages, universal basic income, universal health care, the way opportunities like a higher education are already pitted in favor of those who can afford to attend, who can pay for that ACT prep, who can more easily navigate educational institutions that were built with them in mind. The way the political party that wins is the party that can pay for the endorsement, pay for the airtime, pay for that campaigning, pay for the education, and pay for being part of that inner circle. Some of my professors will offhandedly mention that America is, or is at least in fact becoming, an oligarchy, a political system ruled by the rich and those of elite status, instead of a democracy. And it is a disillusioned and furious part of me that agrees. Of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, these issues around us, institutional sexism, racism, climate change, transphobic bills in Florida, government-approved book banning, avoidance of critical race theory, a war in Ukraine about and constrained by oil. I get stuck thinking about all of it. It enrages me, it terrifies me, it depresses me. I don't have one way of feeling about it, and I don't even have one way of resolving it, on a personal or wider level. I feel tiny in the face of it. I feel traitorous in the middle of it. I feel privileged to stand here and rant about it to all of you and benefit from it at the same time. And I think so much of it comes to what a lot of our theses have touched on, at least a little. What is this bigger narrative that we tell ourselves, especially in the US? What stories do we share, and what stories, thank you Dr. McCracken, do we silence? What voices do we raise up, and what voices do we keep quiet for fear of stirring the pot, for fear of threatening the status quo, for fear of shaking a system that those in power typically don't want shaken? Capitalism is, by and large, a system capable of persevering. It has no interest in change. It benefits from compliance and quiet, good behavior, heteronormativity, the happy, white, straight narrative of mom and dad, 2.5 children and a dog, a house in the suburbs, and enough surplus income to buy a bit on the side, enough comfortability to keep feeding the machine without thinking too hard about what it means, how it functions, who it's hurting in the process, whose silence it tries to force, and whose silence it takes to function. But I'm not going to stand here and say I have the answer. I don't. All I have is where my 2 majors have culminated at an ethical, moral, practical crossroads of a dilemma. I'm graduating into a system I don't like, but need to live within anyway. Global studies gave me the history, the political science, the theoretical lenses, and a whole lot of the disillusionment. Writing and rhetoric gave me the tools of rhetorical analysis, the importance of spotting exigence, the understanding of how we persuade and how we are persuaded by the words and stories around us. And for me, this is that crossroads where they meet, with an awareness of the deep exploitative flaws within our system, but also an understanding of the rhetorical tools at work to perpetuate this system, as well as the rhetorical tools that we all have in our arsenal to challenge it. What does this challenging look like? I'm not really sure yet. I don't have a clean resolution, as much as I wish I did. That's what my thesis is, a discussion really, not an answer. A look at this giant, terrifying sense of anger and unknown that I think a lot of us, especially in my graduating class, are having to grapple with as we enter this next phase of our professional lives. And there are some things I do have the answer to. Some things I do know are important in challenging the system, things like advocating for change, voting, uplifting voices aside from that majority narrative, having these cross-discipline moments where we can share and learn from each other to generate new creative solutions. But the things I don't know feel big and unwieldy. Maybe this is how it always is. Maybe it amounts to a single question. Am I just going to be mad forever? Thank you for listening to me rant. It was really hard, and Dr. McCracken can speak to this as well. Like, so much of this process was me getting really upset and then like not being able to keep moving, or me just getting stuck in ruts where I was like, everything, because like I was saying, I didn't find a solution. And that was, I think, really hard for me in my process, because I was like, what am I going to do just to talk to these people about how like I don't have an answer, and all my research was just me getting like more and more upset, or more and more sad, or more and more angry. I think a honestly, what I had to do was just like embrace that and make it part of my product, because there was no way to like move past it. And I think if I didn't honor that those like feelings were all part of like how I made this, then I wouldn't be showing like the ugly side of it, which is like an ugly thing to talk about. So I don't know. Did that even answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
What was your favorite part of
I think my favorite part while working on this is going to meetings with Dr. Kraken, because every week would be me like doing something or not doing something, and then showing up and being like, oh my god, this is not going to be horrible. And Dr. Kraken like always figuring out how to like solve that for me. And writing this part has been the most fun as well. Like I did an academic paper as well, but definitely the like creative commentary side was like a lot more enjoyable for me.
So Dr. McCarthy did really talking about you is that you are owning your space with this season, and I absolutely love that you present a thesis that doesn't give an answer to the problem that you encounter. I heard 3 excellent presentations today that are about shattering narratives, shattering popular narratives. And rather than asking how you think it should be corrected, I want to know how do you think it should be talked about moving forward? How are you going to engage your thesis moving forward from this event?
That's a tough question, Jake. I feel like where I ended my thesis talking about like cross-discipline is really like where I think things need to go. I don't know if you went to the climate justice panel. It was really cool, and they talked a lot about how like really the only answer to like climate justice problems is if like you figure out how to work on it in your own field instead of thinking you need to like educate yourself on how some other field approaches it. So I think going forward, if everyone like, I think settling into your niche and identifying what you can bring to the table instead of everyone trying to bring the same thing to the table, I think that's the first step. And then just like talking about it, I think, I don't know, things like this where we just get to like talk about it and share with each other, I feel like is the going forward point. Did that answer the question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I think we have time for one more question. So is Mary Poppins just pushing? You told me Mary Poppins. So it's Zoe's fault. She was talking about Mary Poppins this week, and so I had to go listen to my suffragette song because I love the mother. And then it immediately goes to where they're cleaning up the nursery. And I was like, is this Capitalist from Canada? So is it?
I would say I haven't watched Mary Poppins recently enough to answer, but I would say, and the roomies can speak to it, like every movie that we watch, we have our little global studies glasses on, and we're like, they're convincing us that like capitalism is okay. What are they doing? So definitely rewatching kids movies especially, there's some interesting stuff in there when you're like, what is this teaching me? And then just growing up around it, I think you become entrenched in things like this, but we all know that.
Another round of applause.